We'll be starting the webinar broadcast in about 2 minutes. Okay, we're going to get started now. All right, welcome to our webinar today. Wherever you are joining us from, Strategic BCP and Bremer Bank are excited to be presenting today. Strategic BCP is a co-sponsor of the 2018 Business Continuity Awareness Week. My name is Frank Perlmutter, and I'm the president and founder of Strategic BCP. We are an award-winning leader in business continuity software and services, and our solution Resilience One helps customers around the world automate their business continuity programs for better and quicker recoveries. And I'm joined today with Brad Coombs. He is the manager of business continuity at Bremer Bank. And today we're going to take a look into how mapping your business continuity processes yields much stronger business continuity programs. So before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. We will be taking questions. You can type them into the control box. That should be on your right hand of your screen, at least it is on mine today, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. So as we go along, feel free to type those in, and we'll take a look at those at the end. And second, the presentation will be made available on the BCI's website, along with the audio too. So you should be able to see that presentation later on if you've missed anything today, along with all the content in there. So we've got a limited amount of time today. We have about an hour, so let's get started on the webinar. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned before, my name is Frank Perlmutter. I'm the gentleman there at the bottom of your screen, and Brad Coombs is the manager of business continuity at Bremer Bank. For those of you that don't know, Bremer Bank is a $12 billion regional bank headquartered in Minnesota with branches in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and in North Dakota. So I'm in Pennsylvania today, and Brad is in Minnesota. Brad is also a former IT architect. He has an extensive background in implementing resilient systems and in business process mapping and in utilizing this approach. So we hope you'll really get a lot out of this today. Okay, so Brad is going to go over the agenda right now, and then we're going to get right into it.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Frank. Today we're going to be talking about what is business process mapping and why is it a core part of your business continuity program, how to map business process with the strategic BCP operation blueprint method, successes or principles of success that we've had at Bremer Bank, and then we'll open it up for some questions and answers at the end.
Yep. Okay, great.
And Frank is going to now talk to you about what is business process mapping and why use it as a core part of your business continuity program.
Right. Okay. So business process mapping basically takes you through how you're doing an activity or a business function at your organization. So it's not just within private organizations, it also spans across public organizations, obviously. Business process mapping goes way back to the 1940s, where they were using it in manufacturing organizations to become more efficient. So it's evolved over the years, and it's had a lot of different names, but I wrote down a couple of them here. So you can see we sometimes call it business process modeling. So we're putting in those different models into how things operate. Business process flow diagrams, the output of that particular business process mapping, and then also business process analysis too, what we're doing along the continuum of that business process to find out how we can do things more efficiently. So it's mostly been on how we can derive more value and those types of things out of business process mapping. We're going to talk a lot about that today. So typically, when you're looking at business process mapping, it's going to include a couple of items in there. It would either have basic or detailed steps. So chronologically, how does that process flow, or how does data flow within that? So you can see at step 1, we do this, step 2, step 3, step 4, and so on. The flow of process and data, as I just mentioned, the actors, people, or third parties, also known as the vendors, who are actually performing those particular steps within the business process, and then supporting resources. So we're going to be calling these support components throughout the webinar. So those could be things like facilities, IT applications, IT data, a number of different things that are helping us to perform that particular process. So as you can see, there is quite a bit of data that we're including within a business process mapping. So how do we efficiently do that? How do we actually show that in a way that's going to help us in our business continuity planning? Okay. So let's talk about why people map business process. And there's a number of different reasons. And a lot of these, too, are also used in business continuity. That's what we'll go over after this. So business process improvement. When we look at the different ways that we can improve business process, we want to spot the different inefficiencies first. Where are we not deriving the ultimate value? Where are we doing excessive manual handoffs or a process which is inefficient? Vulnerabilities. Where does the process expose the organization to unreasonable impact or risk? And you can imagine, you can see here, these are a lot of business continuity terms. So this is what's also done within the standard business process mapping. Reengineering the business process. So that's the ultimate goal of core business process mapping, as we mentioned. Reduce or eliminate those inefficiencies. Reduce or eliminate those vulnerabilities. People map business process because they're required to. Compliance, I have to do this. For those folks that are currently utilizing ISO 9001, which is a number of enterprises across the United States and obviously around the world. ISO 9001 is that core standard. They are required to determine business processes needed, determine the sequence, that chronology, and the interaction, how they work together within those business processes. Sarbanes-Oxley in the United States requires that business processes be mapped. Those are the ones that are driving the financial results. Are they sound, and are they delivering that correct financial data? GDPR, which we're talking quite a bit about, and I saw a number of different sessions during Business Continuity Awareness Week. The Data Protection Impact Assessment requires mapping data and privacy principles along a process. How do you get the data? How do you use the data? Where do you keep and retain that data? So it's understanding that business process. That is a core part of GDPR and the assessment to see where that data is, where that data lies. And obviously internal audits too. Ensure that processes align with how an organization operates, their standards, their policies, all of the different items around that operation. The last part is about communication. When we look at communication, we look at things like onboarding new employees. So we want to train those people, having that process mapped out and how we're performing it and the different items that they're utilizing, the different computer applications, the different equipment that they're using, the different data, who's performing that process is really important on that onboarding process. It shortens the training time and it ensures consistency too in the actual process delivery. And that's really, really important. And then the value to the organization. Business process mapping shows the process output. People need to show their value. What am I doing to help that organization on delivering on the organization's mission and their different value statements? So you can see business process mapping is a core of what many organizations are currently doing. So it really makes sense to see how do we do it within business continuity. So that's what this next slide reviews. Why should BC professionals map that business process? So the first two, very similar to what we reviewed before. We want to identify risks. And this is also our operational risk management. So not only are we utilizing this within business continuity, but also in ORM. And operational risk management has essentially become merged with business continuity when we look at business process, because we're looking at identifying risks. We're looking at mitigating those risks. So it's almost exactly the same thing when we talk about it from a BC perspective. We look at compliance with BC regulations and our standards and our best practices. So there are a number of different standards, and Brad is going to highlight several of these too in some later slides into why business process mapping is required. You need to gain that visibility into those organizational risks, and that's driving our recovery strategies. It's driving our examination of impacts. There's many different things that we look at. Plan mapping. If we don't understand how we normally operate, how are we going to understand how to operate a process under duress? So that's a really key component of why we do this. And obviously the BIA. Understanding the impact of idling a process is essential. If we don't understand how that process operates and how that process is deriving value for the organization, and conversely what the impact is, we're not going to do our BIA in the right way. So that's really important. And then there's the value add of being a true risk manager. So all of the different items that I covered in the last slide, you can contribute as a business continuity professional. It's providing that added value between just being or beyond just being that standard planner. So all of those things are really, really important. Okay. In the next section of the presentation, Brad is going to go over how to map business process with the operation blueprint method. And he's also going to go over some of the different methodologies that are currently out there that you may have seen or may be using right now. So it gives you a nice examination of the different methods out there, and also some of the steps on how our method can help you in getting from point A to point B.
So there are some challenges with various methodologies used in business continuity management systems. Some do not have the ability to map business process, and without capturing that detail, you can't really understand what is happening within that business process. Visualizations they look nice and they have some information, but they may not have enough detail to support your recovery. And that's really where we're trying to get to, is a good recovery process within these plans. And really, you don't have a way to compare what your current process is to your recovery process in some of those systems. Other tools like Visio flows and swim lanes, there's no place to capture the support components, and we found that to be really critical in formulating our recovery plans, is to know all of those pieces of those applications, the equipment, the forms, the people, and also the other departments that they're interdependent with to complete a business process. Those are critical to understanding your recovery. Oftentimes, and we've all seen these hairball diagrams, that there's too much information on the screen, and it ceases to be a good way to communicate. And those things are very hard to use during a disaster when you're trying to direct a recovery.
Yeah, I think that, when you're looking at some of these, you can see that the intention is there, but the delivery is very difficult. We see, as Brad discussed, very basic here, too much here. There's all these flows and everything. This could also be some of the network diagrams that we see. And then down here, where you're adding on documents, these items here, documents, these items here are data stores. This is just one process, and we don't even see a step here. It just says finance. So we're sort of lumping things just to fit it onto that screen. So it makes it really difficult.
So with the strategic BCP operation blueprint method, you can document each step along the process chronologically and capture it at the right level of detail. We're not trying to capture activity down to the mouse click. We want to have useful detail that would keep everybody on track during a recovery. We link support components, the applications, equipment, vital data, people, vendors to each process step. And these things, having this information here is really useful, and we'll talk about how we can leverage some of that in some of your exercises. You also can identify points of failure, risks for each process step, and also some sort of other vulnerabilities that are found in the business process. You also capture inflows and outflows. Who in the organization is the end-to-end process dependent on, and that not just those individuals who are part of that core process.
Yep. Okay.
And when we don't do this, we miss key factors. You forget information like what are the support components, what are those applications, what are the vendors, what are the forms, and all those things. You miss your legal and regulatory requirements. You might miss key stakeholders, and you might miss those interdependencies between other business units.
Sorry about that. It looks like my PowerPoint just went off there for a sec. Hold on, let me just restart this. Sorry about that. Okay.
We'll bear with you here, Frank.
There we go. Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay. And it's much more difficult to understand or see things like how the business process actually works and how it operates under duress. You don't know what the true impact of the process loss is, and that's where we're getting to that business impact analysis. Where you pinpoint parts of a process that have been impacted during an event, and how to recover part or instead of the whole process. So also, we want to determine how those support components are part of that business process, and that really gets down to RTOs for those applications, single points of failure and inefficiencies that occur. When you're doing this, all kinds of details come out about how a business is performing a function and where the impact occurs. I think Frank has some other details about this slide.
Yeah, there's so much that business process mapping provides for us. If we don't have that visibility, it makes it very difficult to do a lot of our activities. So we really encourage people mapping that business process, especially, right in here to see and understand those, to see where those support components are operating. And we'll see that a little later on in how we're mapping this in some of these later slides. So I think that's really important. Okay. All right. So when we look at business process analysis, what are we looking for in our different mappings? We're looking for excessive manual steps. Are people doing things without different systems? Are we retaining too much paper? And we see this all the time. It's hard to believe, but a lot of people are just keeping just oodles of paper at their site. So there's a lot of times we want to look and we have to do this, but on other times we have it and we've never gotten rid of it. There's no way to destroy that. That could be a problem. Excessive electronic data retention, just like the same thing with the paper and the electronic, where that data is being kept for really no reason. Excessive handoffs, where things are going from one person to another person and a lot of times come back to the original person. So that can really be problematic. And then redundant or repeated activities, especially across departments. When people don't know what they're doing, where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, we have problems because people are like, oh, I already did that. I already called that person back when they needed that call back. It's like, oh, wow, they're doing that too. So when you're mapping that business process, you can see those inefficiencies. You can see where just the process is completely inefficient or where there's risks or there's vulnerabilities. Okay, so now let's take a look at what an operation blueprint looks like. Okay, so here's one format of this, and I'll take you through this in detail. This is a credit card payment processing example, so we chose something generic. You can see at the top is our business process step. Right here are different support components. So these are the different items that are supporting our process. So the people, and then the different applications, all of the different items in there. And then you can see that we're also mapping privacy risks and points of failure. So this is an example of some of the things that we can capture. All of these items in this column, in the support components, and in the risks column, points of failure column, are linked up to the particular step. So let's take you through this. You'll notice that on the left that there are some steps that are in gray and white. Those are the steps that are operating well. And then there's other ones where we have those different risks and points of failure. Those are highlighted in red. So the first step is that the customer is calling an 800 number to make a credit card payment. Accounts receivable app specialist takes the payment, and they all have an extra secured computer at their desk where the payments are taken. You can see that there are some of the privacy risks that we've captured here. That's important. That's why that process is in red. And you can see that they're using, there's our AR application specialist 2, there's that computer, and there's the 3 applications that are working in tandem to capture that credit card payment. In the second step, they ask for the number. They read, this is a pretty typical kind of a step on here. They read you the number, they capture it, and then right here are the different privacy risks. Here, okay, they're seeing whether it processed successfully. If not, they go back up to this step right here, and they perform that. If it does process correctly, it interfaces with their customer system 2 times daily. There's that application. And then what they're doing is they have a form 2583 that's put into the receipt bin for mail pickup. All right. So now we're seeing we might be hitting some problem areas here. Mail is picking that up. They're dropping that form to the AR clerk. The AR clerk is entering into the general ledger. They're filing it in archives. So some of these old processes you can see are creeping in here. We start getting fraught with risks when we have these excessive handoffs. Do they really need that form 2583? And obviously we're using a very obvious example here, but we see these things all the time. We see it throughout banking, healthcare, utilities, manufacturing. We're spotting these processes. And a lot of times these are the items that some of the people at the management level aren't seeing. We've always found too that with the chief operating officer of these companies or people that are running the different business units, this provides them insight into exactly what's going on. And we can also see too, all of the different players in here, all the different systems, all the different people, any different vendors that we've captured in here. So we're hitting on a lot of different audiences. And the other thing is too, is that we are also have the ability, when we understand this process, we can map a recovery process. We know where we can have problems. And instead of saying, well, hey, we're just going to go to this building and we're going to recover this, and that's how we recover credit card processing, we can map a concurrent manual workaround or an automated workaround that says, how do we do this if we don't have these people, these systems, or this equipment? That's how we map our recovery, and we call them recovery playbooks. So it's extremely effective. So I'm going to show you a couple of more reports that we capture too. This second report is a summary report. So it's a nice way where we're taking that information, we're summarizing that. We're summarizing it into the different details, the function of the summary, process summary details. We have our different inflows. These are things that we get from other business departments, and we have our outflows. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll put the recovery time frame in there too. There's a summary of our support components, 12 things to operate that entire process, and then here's a summary of our risks. So it's a nice summary page that we sometimes would add in here. You'll notice that what we've done is we put this into an Excel document. So it's definitely, whether you're using like a business continuity management system like Resilience One, or you're doing this in a spreadsheet, you can do it either way. Obviously, the system would automate it more, but it's definitely doable outside too. And then the last report, what we've done is we've summarized our support component usage, okay, and our risk exposure. So let's go over each of these. You can see, Brad, I'm going to have, Brad's going to start with the left box here, and I'm going to comment a bit on this, and then I'm going to go on to the right box. So go ahead, Brad. All right. Brad, I think we are not hearing you right now.
You're not hearing me right now.
Now I'm hearing you right now.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
All right. So I think so what we're looking at here is this system and how it's being used across the company on the left-hand side. You see each department and which business function is using that system and the RTO for that function. We find that this is a great tool at Bremer for communicating with the business process owners, vendor relationship managers, IT, third-party risk management, legal, all kinds of people who have an interest in understanding how these tools are being used in your organization. It's mapped out right here in great detail and shows how what's driving the criticality of that application and who participates in it.
The other thing you can see too is you can see things that are overutilized or underutilized. So when we're looking at those different resources, you can see here that A+ system is very important. But sometimes we'll see systems that, or just other types of support components, might be equipment, and might be a person in there, and they're really not supporting much enterprise-wide. And it's areas where we can look into cost cutting. And we found this a lot of times where we've had some systems that are also keeping data which doesn't need to be stored anymore. We call those zombie applications because they're just sitting there. There's really no use for them. They're not providing value to the organization. One thing that we might do too is we might give this a score of where each recovery time frame from our BIA would represent a number of points. So we can add those together and see which systems, which titles, which equipment, all those different support components have the most value to the organization and have the least value. So it really points out and can be used in a lot of different ways by linking up that impact right to that process. Onto the right side, we mapped out data privacy risks. For the data privacy risks, what we did was we looked at the different GDPR principles across the enterprise. And we had a much longer list down here. We chopped this off. So you can see we have a potential no consent to process personal data. We're getting data from third parties here in case management. Data retention period may exceed the requirements of actually keeping that personal data. So we're looking at those risks to data privacy. Compliance, you could map controls to those different steps and then summarize those. And then you can see we're scoring this. And that's exactly what we've done. We came up with a scoring methodology, and it said, what is the total risk score to the organization? So this was in our data protection impact assessment. And we said we weighted each of the different items on here, no consent to process personal data, the different principles. And then what we did was we have a risk score by how many times it's hitting the different departments and the different functions in those departments. And then also, too, on how many principles. So it gives us which are the highest risk processes within the organization. And as we saw before, it's important to note, where is that data going out? Where is that data residing? How are we capturing that? So all of those different items and knowing where it's coming in are really, really important. How it's going out, where it's being disseminated. It allows us to track that flow of data, which is required. And as a business continuity professional, you can pinpoint those different items in there and really help with that process and the mitigation of that risk. And then also during a disaster, you're still responsible for these items too. You can't let that data get away from you. And a lot of times that's exactly what those different disasters actually are, is a compromise of that data. So we can find the processes where that vulnerability is. Okay, so now Brad is going to cover all the different his tips and tricks and approaches to success using business process mapping and a lot of other neat tools too.
Great, thanks, Frank. So first we start with our data gathering approach. And we find it most beneficial at Bremer to interview your business partners. And we have the luxury, the size of our company is such that we can do this typically face-to-face or over a e-conference of some sort because of the size of our organization. Other companies are going to have much bigger challenges if they are spread over a much wider geography. But we like to include not just the managers, but the subject matter experts. And those are the people who know the daily ins and outs of the business process and how they change over time. And doing this as an interview or things come out in that dialogue that are quite unexpected at some time. If you did this through a survey or other kind of paper-based format, you might not uncover details about having boxes of paper stored under desks or having 20 logins that the group shares for external websites where they're gathering information and how they store those passwords. Things like that come out during that dialogue. You also can go to their internet site and examine their content there. What are the products that they're offering and supporting? What are the procedures that they have documented and how detailed are those? If they have manuals for work and workflows, things like that, you can uncover that from their internet content. And also some departments might even publish their internal service level agreement or the contracts that they have with their external partners. We also have the opportunity to do a deeper dive with IT partners such as project managers, business analysts, and application analysts. And these people often understand what the plans and roadmaps are and have done detailed analysis about how products are being used within those business processes. And then you have to have sort of a continuous feedback loop with your business partners where you provide the business process mapping back to them and they can review and start a process improvement. And oftentimes when you build these relationships through your organization, those people will start to seek you out and tell you when processes changed and try to keep their plans in sync with their business processes.
Yeah. Brad, how important is it to gather that information prior to going in and sitting down and doing a mapping? How much does that help you in doing that?
Well, again, it's really useful to have a good understanding of how they function or what services they're providing, and also kind of where they are in your overall organization's revenue stream, so that you can help and guide that dialogue as well and understand the criticality of that business process, understand where they are in the revenue stream and how many regulatory requirements they have, things like that. Those impact factors that really drive your RTOs. Understanding it and being able to guide and dig into those things is really important.
Great. Okay.
So we really find that this tool sets us up very well to do very effective exercises. And if you understand what the business process is and all of the pieces that go into supporting that business process, you can have a much more effective exercise. We don't want to waste time on training people on how processes work. We want to really focus in on trying to stress those business processes. And unless you've captured this detail and looked at it as far as recovery, you can't actually put together a good exercise to help them understand their recovery processes. And then also, you have to consider where they're trying to get to from a recovery standpoint to a recovered standpoint. So when do they return back to a normal process? Design your exercises to stress your processes to a limit and to its limits and beyond. It's not just fires and tornadoes that we're trying to test. We want to get beyond that. We want to get into dig into their business processes. Know upfront what the business processes are and what applications they use, what vendors they are dependent on, and what the RTO and RPO of those vendors is or has committed to. So when you do these exercises, you can really find out where their vulnerabilities are. One example of in 2017, we used a ransomware attack to test all of our critical business processes. We tried to do a scenario that was realistic and broad scoped, and also got worse over time, so that they can really feel the pressure of not having their systems available to them, not having their data available to them. One of the things that was very interesting that came out of this was that we had a business process that was using a third-party vendor that had a 48-hour RPO, but in the business process, they were destroying hard copies of transactional information. And when we dug into it, it became very clear that when they were trying to do this recovery and get their data back, they had no source for those transactions. They had lost that because they were shredding that information. If you don't understand all the details of what they're doing and how they're doing it and who they're using to do it, these things won't come out in that testing.
Yeah, and that's huge. When you look at that exercise, they were shredding important documents. So there you go. That's actually the opposite of keeping excessive paper information on site. It had to be kept, and yet they were shredding it, and there was no way. I mean, I guess you could have pulled it out of the shredder, right, Brad, and just put Scotch tape on it, right?
Yeah, you could pull it out of the shredder. You could try to get into the bins before the contractor came to shred the detail, but there's no guarantees there. You want guarantees that you can actually recreate that data when you need to. So
yeah, really important. Okay, tell us a little bit about the cross training that you're doing at Bremer.
So one of the things that we're leveraging our plans for is helping people understand the what of the normal and recovery processes. And you can use some of the details in your plans to leverage as onboarding tools to share the high-level detail of both the department plan and the process activity with either new employees or others who are just interested in what's going on there. We know that during recovery, you may have to restaff your organization from inside or outside and after an event. And this is a great tool to help onboard those people, to give them the information that they need to be able to step into a role. An example of this is that our internal audit organization is they have a broad knowledge of the entire organization, depending on A, where they came from in the organization if they had, or B, those things that they've been auditing on a regular basis. We look at those people as a great resource in the event of recovery because they can step out of their internal audit role and go and back up a process if we're needing resources like that. And this is a tool that can help them get on their feet quickly. It also helps us pinpoint people with similar skills across the organization who have customer service background, who are similar activities, who are good at transaction processing or have administrative/finance capabilities so that they can slot into those processes to help back them up.
And we've seen that during the exercises too, where it's almost like and we've discussed this before for folks that aren't familiar with this, a value stream approach where people are essentially performing the same functions, but across different departments. So, it's great for knowledge sharing because you're seeing, taking a phone call at one part of the bank is the same as taking a phone call or similar, a similar skill set in another part of the bank. And during a recovery, that can be really useful, right?
Yeah, it sure can.
Yeah, that's a big deal. We've seen that across a number of different plans, and you can really see it too. Healthcare is really critical too, where they're looking for folks in customer service or supporting the different providers within that healthcare network. And it's interesting because they're normally in their own silos and they're reporting to different places. But during a disaster, it's really important. And also that business process can help those business leaders really see those efficiencies too, where people can actually, it helps with their cross promotion. The last thing that Brad is going to cover before we take questions is consideration of the third party. So tell us a bit about that, of how that plays a role in business process mapping.
So many of you have regulatory guidance about managing your third parties, especially in banking. We are highly aware of how our third parties are partners in fulfilling our everyday business processes. So there are third parties that may be mission critical hosted solutions. You may have third parties or cloud-based applications. Those are third parties. Workplace administration and transaction processing. So throughout our organization, we're heavily dependent on third parties. And you cannot fully understand the point in the business process where that third party plays a role until you do this business process mapping. And those in the banking industry are very familiar with Appendix J of the FFIEC BCP work program, as it talks about how to manage or what you have to have for expectations of your third parties, that they must be able to meet from an external vendor the same thing as your internal organization has. So from an RTO, RPO, and testing frequency standpoint, you need to hold your third parties to those standards. And if you don't understand how those third parties are being used in that business process and how critical they are to that business process, you don't understand your relationship with that vendor. And then there also has to be consideration about security and privacy of data with that third party. Those details come out in this dialogue and help you understand what data they're using and how they're managing it.
Yep. All right, excellent. All right, so now we're going to let me put up this slide here of how to contact each of us, and we're going to read through a couple of the questions now. Thank you so much. There's quite a few. So Brad and I are going to take a read through here, and we're going to start. Give us about 15 seconds here, and we'll kick off the questions here. All right, let's see. All right. So the first question is, who do you find is conducting the business process mapping in most organizations? All right. Well, Brad, why don't you talk about who is conducting it at Bremer?
Definitely, it's my team. The business continuity team is doing that, where we're heading up the interviews and we are documenting it and giving the feedback to the organization.
Yeah, oh, go ahead. Keep going, Brad.
We definitely have to partner with those people who own those business processes. Technically, we feel like we're a facilitator in this effort, not an owner.
Yeah, you can see, there are some, as Brad showed in an earlier slide, there's a number of places where business process may be captured. I think it depends on the size of the organization. Sometimes you'll see with ERP systems that business process mapping may already be captured. Sometimes for the onboarding, those activities may also be captured too. Auditors may also be capturing that too. So, getting that data up front is always really helpful just to see what's already been done. If your company is a public company, sometimes what we'll do is we'll also leverage that third-party auditor, and chances are they're probably some of the ones that are also auditing your business continuity process. When you ask for that, that's typically seen as a positive thing because you're getting involved in their process and actually making their job easier too. Okay, let's see. The next question is, if it's not already happening, what is your experience on BC professionals driving the business process mapping? So Brad, I'll put you on the spot here. So when you first started doing this, when you first started doing business process mapping, what were some of your initial steps to sort of, to socialize this in your management? What were some of the things that you did?
Well, first we made a lot of mistakes, I'm going to say. But again, getting executive buy-in into what we're doing was critically important. And we actually have an executive committee that we report to and meet with quarterly. And we try to have a person in that executive committee that heads up each kind of tier of the organization so they can send that message down and get that buy-in. Now, that doesn't say that those interviews or the fact-finding is always successful as a result of it, but iterating through it and finding people who are really willing participants is really critical.
Yeah, I think that, when we see success in organizations, it does, obviously in every single business continuity regulation, standard, and best practice, it's getting that buy-in from the steering committee. Some people don't have those steering committees either. So, I mean, you really want to, if you have an opportunity to start up and to have that support or even start up that steering committee, we typically will put that into a project plan. We see our clients do that, and they'll say, well, what is this all about? And you find that once you map a lot of that, most of that, like I would say 80% of that, typically won't change from year to year. So you'll have something which is, after you've mapped it, it gives you that opportunity to find those vulnerabilities and to evolve. And then also, too, to really roll that out and to have minor updates and maintenance. I think it's just like business continuity planning. People, I think, initially look at like a BIA and they're like, oh, I got to do recovery plans and I got to think about how I'm going to operate under duress and everything. And they get overwhelmed by it. And I think it's, with any of these items, it's socializing it the right way, training the people, and then showing them a lot of the benefits like we initially showed. It gives them that exposure of their business process and visibility into why what they do is so important. And we constantly see a lot of those people, that are in the field and operating those business processes say, you know what, I finally get a voice to say, you know what, this isn't operating so well. And we see a lot of those folks who are very successful. What do you think we should do? And then they partner with the business continuity people to really deliver that value. So it's a great partnership in moving forward. Okay, the next question is, what is your experience in promoting cross-functional understanding of business processes? So, Brad, what's your experience in doing that?
So one of the things that we do is whenever an interdependency is identified, we like to get the participants in the room and really talk through that and understand that interdependency of that cross-functional activity. In 2018, we're actually trying to create tests around that interdependency. So that's where we're going with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. All right, let me see. There's a whole bunch more questions. So let me scroll down a little bit here. Okay. Okay. All right. Is business process analysis in addition to the business impact analysis, or are they essentially the same? If not, what are the drawbacks of doing one or the other? I'll address part of this, and then I'll have a Brad comment too. They are different things. The business impact analysis is looking at, if you take down one of those processes, what would the impact be to the organization, the quantitative and the qualitative impacts. Business process analysis focuses on the steps that are being completed. So what you're doing is you're looking at that process to spot those different efficiencies and points of failure. So you're looking at the different steps, whereas in the business impact analysis, you're taking you typically take that as a whole. So you would go and you would say, okay, with that credit card payments, what would be the impact of that? And then you would spot the specific vulnerabilities, points of failure, and along that different continuum. So those are two different things. Brad, any comments on that one?
Yeah, I like to think of the business process map as a foundational element to the BIA, or that's the subject that you're examining when you're doing the BIA at the business function level. So it helps when we're doing the BIA to be able to ask very pointed questions about risk and impact when you understand that process.
The next question is, do you find the business case that the benefit of the detail has an adequate return to engage senior stakeholders? So this requires some work, no doubt about it. I think if you're doing it in a way that where you're keeping it simple, like Brad said, you don't have to go down to a click level. I don't think it's as much effort as everybody thinks. When people think of business process, sometimes it's every click and every interaction and everything. I think if you capture the basic process, a lot of people are finding that useful. And it's much better than about what 90% of the folks are doing out in the field, where they're just saying, okay, I'm going to process credit card payments. So is it enough, Brad, so you have provided adequate return to engage senior stakeholders. Why is that? Why are they finding value in this? So what are some of the nuggets that they're getting out of this to find value?
Well, really it helps them understand that you understand what's happening in their organization. It is, first of all, one thing. The other thing is that we actually put our senior management, senior stakeholders through exercises, and they can see one of the great values is when you have these key vendors that are involved in every corner of your business, and you can go through an exercise with your key stakeholders about losing that vendor. It really opens their eyes to the value of what you're doing.
It's interesting. There's another question that says, how can a BC Pro who may not have other organizational experience effectively pick out points of failure, say a very detailed exercise such as GLR journaling? I always find that in the organizations that I've been at, my background is in banking and partially in healthcare, but I go into chemicals manufacturing, utilities, things like that. I sit with those folks in those business units, and Brad, I've seen you do the same, where you're sitting with them and say, explain to me how you're doing this particular business process, and you sit and you learn with them. And I got to tell you, I think the things that a lot of business continuity professionals don't talk about, it's those soft skills where you're partnering with the people in the business units and with their managers and with the executives, and you're understanding how to do these different items. I remember I was out on a factory floor and they taught me how to manufacture a dangerous chemical, essentially. And they were teaching me that, and then they said, okay, let's go through the exercise and see how well we taught you. And they helped me out. I was actually a part of that recovery process. I think they feel, it takes a little bit of time, but I think if you pick something that you're interested in within those different business processes, and you sit and you learn something with them, especially with the highly critical ones, you show how valuable that process is, and you show, too, how valuable what you're doing to help them recover. You show them how valuable that is, too. Brad, any comments on that?
I think you hit that one on the head.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. We have about another 15 questions here. Let's see. All right. Oh, here we go. Here's a good question. How much can you leverage SOX or control business process mappings in business process mappings for BIA? So if somebody has actually mapped some of those different SOX controls, how could you take that and utilize those in business continuity? I have a couple of things. Brad, what do you think about that?
Well, we're partnering with a lot of other parts of our organization who are doing their own kind of risk assessment, process mapping, and those tools are definitely easy to use when you're doing the BIA and understanding the risk and vulnerability. So, yeah,
they're very useful. They're very useful. All of the auditors have done the heavy lifting.
Right.
You say, you go to your external auditor and you say, hey, all the, those mappings that you've done, most of them will provide that to you. You say, hey, look, I want to see how accurately you captured that. And, as Brad mentioned earlier, working with the auditors who understand a lot of that process and are helping with the mapping, and especially during those exercises and real life disasters and recovery, they have a wide breadth of knowledge, and they're excited to show you what they do. We're going to do one more question. And what we're going to do is for after the webinar, what we're going to do is for the ones that we haven't answered, we'll send you some messages back to you. So we'll send you some emails too. So hopefully we should have that list of your email addresses so we can email you back. The last one is, can you re-explain the risk scoring for your example and data privacy risk? Absolutely. So. A data privacy impact assessment, it's a fairly new thing for most organizations. What they're doing is they're mapping, it's required in many different methodologies, and it is saying where is that data being captured, where is it being retained. I mean, basically every point where data is resident or generated or captured or gathered within an organization. Where along the business process is that? What we've done is that, let me see if I can pull up that slide here. All right, hold on one sec. Let me just go back. Okay, so the different risk scores. So there's two different things that we did here. The first thing that we did was we looked at it, and there were points based upon the criticality. So just like over here where each of the RTOs has a number of points. So say we have 10 total RTOs, most aggressive being 10 points, 9, 8, 7, 6. We had that in our calculation. And then also each of our different privacy principles also got points too. So we added in points for every time we saw that data privacy risk across the organization and added those up. So the more important the process, the more points it got, and then we aggregated those into an overall risk score. There's a detailed way to do this that we have another presentation that we do on that, and if anybody's interested in that, we'd be happy to show you too. So it looks like we're at the top of the hour. I believe it's 6 p.m. In the UK. It's 1 p.m. here and 12 p.m. in Minnesota. So we wanted to thank you today for all of your attention and definitely for all of your questions and engagement. As we mentioned before, we'll be making this presentation available through the BCI. And also, too, if you have any other information requests, too, feel free to send a message to info@strategicbcp.com if you don't want to send something to us personally. And there's a number of different presentations that we've given over the last 5 years that people have found real helpful on these topics and some other ones too. So once again, thank you for your time, attention, and have a great evening or a great afternoon too. I guess everybody's all over the place. So thanks again. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.